Hi, welcome back to our Road to Steam series, a series in which we'll be creating a game from scratch. Previously on our HEUSS Dev Diaries, we made our first 3D model with Blender and created combat animations for our player character. In today's episode, we'll go in depth on how we design our enemies, and create our first two fully fledged foes, the Grunt and the Shieldbearer. If you're interested in more video game behind the scenes like this, join us by subscribing to the channel for exquisite HEUSSian delights. So, without further ado, let's dive right into it. For a long time, you've all suffered the sight of our flimsy placeholder enemies. Amalgamation of loosely coupled together capsules, ready to be exterminated by our player character. We're quite fond of these white blobs, but there's a place and time for everything, and today is the time to give them the proper update they deserve. Due to the progress we made in our latest episodes, we can finally start creating the enemies you'll see in the final product. But before going into the nitty-gritty, we'd like to share with you the general approach and philosophy we take when designing these foes. The way we design enemies in HEUSS is greatly inspired by chess. In chess, every piece has a specific purpose. They mostly have only one or two ways they can move on the board. Individually, their behaviors are quite simple, but it's by using them in different combinations that we can create complex situations during a game of chess. In HEUSS, we follow a similar formula. When we design enemies, we always have two specific goals in mind. The first one is for the behavior to be simple. The reason for this is the nature of our gameplay. HEUSS is a game where you constantly face multiple enemies at the same time. If each of these enemies would use complex patterns to fight, the player would become overwhelmed and he wouldn't be able to keep track of what's happening on the screen. That's why we keep our enemy patterns simple, and choose to pursue complexity through the different combinations of foes we can have during a fight. Our second goal is to have each enemy fill a specific purpose. In HEUSS, we try to eliminate redundancy as much as possible when creating enemies. Every new foe introduced is meant to teach something new to the player. It can range from new mechanics, to new challenges that test specific skills, etc. To stay true to these goals, we've come up with a blueprint that streamlines a whole enemy into 4 components. The first one of these components is the enemy class. The class of an enemy dictates its behavior in combat. There are 4 of them in total. The defender class that blocks player attacks. The archer class that throws projectiles. The rogue class that evades player attacks. And the attacker class that counter-attacks the player. Each of these classes have specific visual feedbacks associated with them. That way the player can easily identify the behavior of newly introduced enemies. As an example, a defender will always have a shield, and an attacker will always have red eyes. We can also combine these classes to create hybrid enemies. Our second component is the enemy's abilities. These are the moves they can do on the battlefield. Each of these moves must fit logically with the enemy's current class. We cannot have moves that conflict with a class theme, like a defender that shoots arrows. These abilities can range from blocking attacks at a certain height to switching sides after being hit. Our third component is enemies' special traits. These are exotic behaviors that do not fall under a specific class. An example for this would be an enemy that crash lands on the ground when it spawns. Each of these special abilities are meant to be unique to a single enemy, and surprise the player in unexpected ways. That way, we can really flesh out the personality of each one of our foes. Our last component is the enemy's health. This one is quite easy to grasp. It's how many times an enemy can be hit before dying. When these 4 components are complete, the only thing that's left to do is to give a worthy name to our creation and throw it on the battlefield. Now that you have a clear understanding on how we design our enemies, it's time to get our hands dirty and start bringing them to life. The first enemy we'll tackle is the Grunt. Like his name implies, he's the most basic foe of our game. The purpose of the Grunt is to teach the player the most basic mechanic of HEUSS, which is to attack enemies when they get in the hilt's range. Because of this, he does not have any abilities. The only thing that he has is a special trait called Gene Loto. This gives him a small chance to have one more hit point when he spawns. The Grunt is meant to be easily dispatched, and make you feel like a killing machine on the battlefield. In the last episode, we made combat animations for our player, but not for our enemies. To properly bring the grunt to life, we'll need to remedy this. When talking about animations, the major thing that differentiates our enemies from the player is that they are never stationary, they're constantly changing their velocity. This brings up an interesting question. How do you animate something that varies in movement speed? At first glance, we could just do one animation for the enemy's movement, like a simple walk. It would work well at specific speeds, but it would also start to crumble when the enemy would accelerate, or slow down. The solution we found to fix this tricky problem is to make use of blend trees. Blend trees can help us fill the void between two distinct animations. It allows us to blend the animations together to create a new one. What we need for this to work is 3 different animations: an idle pose, a walk, and a run. We then need to know the maximum speed of our enemies to create a speed scale. The run will be assigned to the end of the scale, which is the maximum speed. The idle pose will be assigned to the start of the scale where the speed is 0. Finally, we fine-tune the position of the walk to a speed that matches the animation. To move across this scale, we link the blend parameter to the current speed of our enemy. So when the enemy changes speed, the blend parameter copies its value and automatically blends the animation. For the rest of the animations, here's some gameplay to showcase them in action. The Shieldbearer. A more advanced foe than the grunt, one that uses a round shield in combat. The purpose of the Shieldbearer is to teach the player how to effectively switch his vertical stance during combat. The Shieldbearer does this by positioning its shield to one of 3 height level: high, middle, or low. If the player lands an attack where the shield is positioned, he'll be stunned, which will leave him vulnerable to attacks for a short duration. In addition to blocking player attacks, the Shieldbearer also has a special trait that allows him to block projectiles. However, the shield must be aligned with the height level of the projectile for this to happen. This enemy is meant to be a little more resilient than the grunt, to give you the impression that he's holding the line against your onslaught. When it comes to animating the Shieldbearer, we are again faced with a peculiar challenge. Since episode 2, we have represented shields with red discs. The way we've set this up is by having 3 shields per enemy. We would make a specific shield visible depending on where the enemy was blocking, and make the others invisible. We cannot do that anymore because the shield is now linked to the animations of our model. To deal with this problem, we'll do the same thing we did previously with the grunt's movement animations. We'll use blend trees to transition from one shield height to another. To make this work, we'll need to create 3 variants for every existing animations. One where the shield is held high, one where it's held in the middle, and a final one where it's held low. By combining them in multiple blend trees, we link the overarching blend parameter to the current shield position of the enemy. This allows us to smoothly transition between animations when the shield position is changed. Now, let's see how all of this looks like in action. Stay tuned for the 7th episode of our Road to Steam series, where we will cover the progress we'll make on the game in the coming weeks. If you have any feedback or just anything you want to share, don't be shy, and fill the comment section down below. If you enjoyed our content and want to support the channel, feel free to leave a like and subscribe. On this, Godspeed to all of you, and we'll see you on the next episode of our Road to Steam series.
Skulle